What would have happened if Yoriichi Tsugikuni had actually finished what he started? That question sits at the center of everything in Demon Slayer. Because if you trace the thread of how the whole story unfolds, the Kamado family's tragedy, Tanjiro's journey, the deaths of so many Hashira across generations, almost all of it leads back to one moment in a bamboo forest during the Sengoku era. A moment where the most powerful Demon Slayer in history had Muzan Kibutsuji's head barely attached to his body, unable to regenerate and still couldn't finish it, not through lack of strength, not through hesitation, through something as unpredictable as Muzan shattering his own body into 1,800 pieces, scattering them faster than anyone could track. Yoriichi destroyed just over 1,500 of those pieces before the rest reassembled into something small enough to flee. And that is the wound the entire story bleeds from. A kill that was within reach and simply didn't land in time. So let's sit with it. If Yoriichi kills Muzan in that bamboo forest, what does the world of Demon Slayer look like? Before getting into consequences, it's worth grounding ourselves in how complete that near kill actually was, because it wasn't close in the way most fights in this series are close. It wasn't a drawn-out battle where both sides wear each other down. It was one-sided in a way that bordered on surreal. Muzan had been untouchable for centuries at that point. The Demon Slayer Corps had been trying and failing to reach him for generations. And then, Yoriichi showed up, and the fight lasted by any real measure, seconds. He activated the transparent world, saw Muzan's 7 hearts and 5 brains, and completed all 13 forms of sun breathing in a single continuous movement, targeting every vital organ at once. Muzan had no counter. He went from confident to holding his own severed head in place with his hands, unable to regenerate, staring at a bright red Nichiren blade that was incinerating his cells on contact. There's a small detail in that scene worth paying attention to. While all of this was happening, Tamayo, who was standing nearby, wasn't trying to help Muzan. She was watching with what the manga describes as eyes full of hope. She had been his reluctant servant for years, trapped by his blood curse, hating him with everything she had. And for the first time, she was watching someone actually win. The look on her face tells you everything about what killing Muzan would have meant to the people suffering under him the longest. Then, his body detonated into fragments, and the pieces that survived were enough. The most immediate consequence of Muzan dying in that bamboo forest is the one the series shows you at the end of its own story. All demons created from his blood cease to exist. That's a hard rule of the world Gotok built. Muzan is the progenitor. His blood runs through every demon. When he dies, the entire demonic ecosystem collapses with him. So if Yoriichi kills him in the Sengoku era, that erasure happens 500 years early. Every demon alive at that moment dissolves. The 12 Kazuki, which hadn't fully formed yet, never get the chance to become what they were. There are no upper moons, no lower moons, no centuries of the Demon Slayer Corps fighting a war it couldn't decisively end, and all the institutional scarring that came from an enemy who couldn't be killed. All of it simply doesn't happen. Michikatsu, the brother who doesn't fall. This is probably the most emotionally loaded consequence of Yoriichi winning, and the one that gets most personal. Michikatsu Tsugikuni, Yoriichi's older twin brother, became Kokushibo, upper rank 1 of the 12 Kazuki, the second strongest demon in existence behind Muzan. His path there was genuinely tragic. He was a talented swordsman living in the shadow of a brother whose gifts were so far beyond comprehension that even after centuries of demonic power, he still couldn't close the gap. Michikatsu awakened the Demon Slayer mark and then learned what that meant. That marked swordsman tended to die before 25. He was afraid, and Muzan found him in that fear. Muzan didn't just turn him into a demon, he recruited him, told him that demonhood would let him escape the mark's curse, live indefinitely, and finally surpass Yoriichi. Michikatsu took the offer. He spent the next 4 centuries chasing something he could never reach, not because of any failure of effort, but because Yoriichi's ceiling was simply that much higher. If Yoriichi kills Muzan in that bamboo forest, that offer never comes. There is no demon king waiting to exploit a frightened man's desperation. What Michikatsu does without that path is uncertain. He might have died young as most marked slayers do, or found his way through as Yoriichi did, despite the same curse. But he would have died as himself, as Michikatsu Tsugikuni, flawed and envious but human, rather than as a demon who spent eternity resenting a brother he never stopped loving. Even in the actual story, Kokushibo kept the childhood flute Yoriichi had given him, all the way to his death. In a world where Muzan dies early, that relationship ends differently, maybe not happily, but humanly. Tamayo, a different kind of life. Tamayo's story is almost entirely defined by proximity to Muzan. She was ill, she accepted what she thought was a cure, and she became a demon without understanding what that meant. She killed her family in a rampage she couldn't control. She served Muzan out of helplessness for years, and then she watched Yoriichi almost save her, and found a purpose in that almost. She spent several more centuries researching demon biology, developing drugs, working toward a kill she couldn't accomplish herself. If Muzan dies in that bamboo forest, Tamayo is freed. Her grief over her family doesn't disappear. That happened before Yoriichi arrived, and no outcome of that fight changes it. But she's released from the servitude, from the blood curse, from the centuries-long obligation that became her entire reason for existing. And what she does with that freedom matters. Her intellect was extraordinary. She spent hundreds of years studying demon physiology while hiding from Muzan, working alone, without the support of any institution. If the demonic threat is gone, and she's simply a woman with vast medical knowledge and an extended lifespan, what she could contribute to human medicine becomes genuinely hard to overstate. Sun breathing survives. One of the most consequential things Muzan did after escaping Yoriichi was to systematically hunt down and destroy every practitioner of sun breathing. He enlisted Kokushibo's help, and together they came close to wiping it entirely from history. It only survived as the Hinakami Kagura, a ceremonial dance the Kamado family preserved without fully understanding what it was. If Muzan dies in the Sengoku era, that systematic erasure never happens. Sun breathing continues as a living tradition, and because sun breathing is the original, all other breathing styles are derivatives, adaptations made because no one else could fully master the source. Having it survive changes the ceiling for every demon slayer in the generations that follow. Yoriichi had already been trying to teach it to other slayers during his time with the Corps. None of them could match him, so he helped them adapt it into other forms. If those traditions develop from an unbroken lineage rather than a near extinction, the martial culture of the world that follows looks meaningfully different. The Kamados. This is where the what if lands its most personal blow. The entire plot of Demon Slayer exists because of what Muzan did to the Kamado family on one winter night. He killed most of them and turned Nezuko into a demon. That act set everything in motion. Tanjiro's entire journey, every loss, the whole story. If Muzan dies 500 years before that night, the Kamado family lives. Tanjiro grows up with his siblings. Nezuko never has to fight her way back to herself. His mother doesn't die in the snow. The world he inhabits is one without demons, where his family's connection to sun breathing is a ceremonial tradition rather than a survival tool, where being kind and warm and steady, which are the things Tanjiro actually is. In a world where Muzan is already dead, there's no Demon Slayer story. There's just a kind boy selling charcoal in the mountains, with his whole family around him, living a life that is small and ordinary and whole. That's what Yoriichi's failure cost the world. Not just centuries of death, but the specific, particular lives that got bent and broken so that a story about people fighting to reclaim their humanity could even exist. What Yoriichi carries and doesn't. After the fight in the bamboo forest, Yoriichi was banished from the Demon Slayer course, blamed for Muzan's escape, for letting Tamayo go, for his brother's transformation. He spent his remaining years carrying that failure, not because it destroyed him, but because he understood exactly what it meant. He knew what Muzan would do with the time he'd been given. He told all of this to Sumiyoshi Kamado, Tanjiro's ancestor, sitting in that small house, weeping quietly after carrying everything alone for too long. It's one of the most human moments in the entire series. A person who should, by any objective measure, be celebrated for what he almost did, instead absorbed completely in what he didn't finish. In a world where he succeeds, that grief doesn't exist. He returns from the bamboo forest having done what he was born to do, in a single clean moment. Whether that gives him peace is another question. He had already lost nearly everyone he loved before Muzan was even part of his story, and tragedy had already shaped him long before that fight. But at the very least, he doesn't spend his final years knowing that his one moment of almost was the hinge on which 500 years of suffering turned. The question that goes unanswered. One thing is worth sitting with as a final thought. Just before Yoriichi moved to finish Muzan off, he paused and asked him a question.
What is the weight of a human life to you?
Muzan didn't answer. His face reddened and Yoriichi read it as anger. That question was never answered, and in some ways, the entire story of Demon Slayer is a 500-year attempt to answer it through other means. Not through Muzan, who would never give an honest reply,